All right. Hello, friends. I think we're now live. Thanks for hanging out. We got another um, live sketchnoting Q&A. It's fun to host these from time to time on YouTube. Did one of these a couple months back and had a good time just hanging out, chatting with y'all, seeing what questions come up, what aspects of sketchnoting you're interested in exploring right now. So for those joining us live, drop a quick hello into the text chat. Let us know how you're doing today, where you're coming from. Thanks also for folks catching the replay. I hope you find it useful to see what questions come up and follow along with our conversations here. As folks are saying hello in the chat, I thought I'd share a couple of kind of small announcements, things going on lately here at Verbal to Visual. Yesterday was pretty exciting because we had our first first live lesson within the new course that I've been developing throughout this year called Digital Sketchnoting. Thanks to those of you who are participating in that course, those who joined in on the live webinar yesterday. And we're doing that on a live weekly basis for the next 9 weeks. This is kind of a fun way to do like the first version of this course, present it live, have folks there within the chat to participate, and folks be able to share their work within Verbal to Visual's new online learning platform, which has also been fun to explore. We're using Mighty Networks now as our classroom environment, and it's a pretty cool tool. So we had the first lesson yesterday. The full replay of that is available. We'll be having those lessons each week for digital sketchnoting if you want to use a tablet and your app of choice for your sketchnoting. And then later today, there's another opportunity for live interaction and for you to be the focus as opposed to me on camera here like this. We're having our second ever monthly mastermind within the Verbal to Visual community. So that community is a kind of an additional branch that I relaunched about a month ago that I think sits nicely kind of alongside the courses, which are great for kind of complete at your own pace learning. The community is for those who maybe have taken a course and want to keep developing their skills, keep working toward mastery. And that's an opportunity where I'm sharing kind of activities and prompts each week. And folks can regularly share their work and connect in these monthly masterminds, which are live video chats where members of that community can hop on, talk through whatever sketchnoting project they're working on, share any challenges they might be facing, and talk through how to keep moving forward with that project. So that's happening at noon today, 3 hours from right now. So it's a reminder to any community members here to keep an eye out for that also if you want some more interaction today. And also if you hadn't heard about the community side of things, wanted to let you know that that's another opportunity to connect on a bit deeper level for more kind of ongoing kind of skill building and sharing and feedback opportunities. So that's what's going on there. Loving the active chat already. We got hello from John. Sudanchu says, eagerly waiting for the session to start. It has started. Hello from Sweden. That's Emma. Good to see you, Emma. Omar says hello from Mexico. John says, I'm interested in learning more about mind maps. Okay, something we could dig into. Rachel says hello from Denver. Javier from Rhode Island. Ernie from Missouri. Barbara Golden from California. Hi, Barbara. John. John, what would you like to know about mind maps? Let's try to get a little bit more specific, just for that question at least, because I'm curious. Sharon says hello from Minnesota. Katie from Portland. Portland, Oregon, or Maine? I'm going to assume Portland, but that's just because I live here. Shelley says hello from Wisconsin. we've got maybe our first question here. Was willing to know how sketchnoting can be implemented to a subject such as mathematics. Yeah, so that's I feel like applying sketchnoting to math or science, that's a fairly common question because it's a little bit less straightforward maybe in terms of how you might visualize a subject. It's a little bit more abstract. And my go-to for those more kind of abstract subjects, I tend to lean into things like flowcharts and like process diagrams, because I feel like that's a lot of what math is about, is kind of breaking things down into a problem-solving process to try to understand whatever problem you're working with. And depending on the types of problems that you're working with, each kind of category of math has a particular problem-solving process associated with it. So I think that's a good starting point. See if you can kind of use a flow chart to maybe map out what that process looks like. And in some areas of math, like geometry, of course, there's a lot of opportunity to bring in sketches of whatever the situation you're working with, where like a sketch of the situation can help lead to the solution of that particular problem. So those are my initial thoughts with math, like lean in on flowcharts, kind of problem-solving process diagrams, and when it's not so abstract and dealing with like a real-world situation, like sketch out whatever that real-world situation is to help you use that to kind of wrap your head around the problem. Got hello from Vietnam, from Italy. Lisola says, I love people's sketch notes, but I never know how to arrange my notes when I'm listening to a talk or a lecture. Yeah, okay, so this gets to the question of layout. Like, how do you decide where on the page to put the ideas that you're working with? And here's a good opportunity to bring in mind maps. Glad this came up. So when I think about layout, I think of kind of two primary options to start with. One is a more structured approach where maybe you might actually try to sketch some things out today. Maybe you break the page up into columns, and then as the ideas come in, you kind of just take notes top to bottom. Let's see if my lighting's good enough. So like you could literally put lines on the page, like this one and this one, to kind of break it up. And then as you're taking notes, you're just moving from top to bottom like this. And with the limited space here is actually a helpful thing, because then you can just move back and forth between some like little bit of a sketch, some sort of a visual, and then a sentence or a phrase to give context to that visual. So you can just kind of go back and forth between some sort of visual, some sort of text. You can throw in some divider lines when the topic changes. And that's an example of kind of giving yourself a constraint to work with on the page so that you don't have to think as much about where the next idea goes. So that's what I would call like a structured approach to layout. A mind map is a little bit more organic. That's the other approach. If it's organic, it's kind of like you don't have any marks on the page to provide that structure, but you do have a plan for how you'll fill the page. So with a mind map, you might start with like the main topic or question in the center of a page. This might be backwards for you, but you start with the main topic in the center, and then as the ideas are coming in, you kind of start to identify the subtopics kind of radiating outward from that main topic. So as different things come up, you start to kind of move outward from there. And within each of those boxes, you can include some combination of words and sketches, even if even if you're only using literal like boxes filled with words, that can still be a helpful organization tactic. So as the different topics come up, you kind of do that first layer of branching out. But then if the thing that you're listening to or reading, if they go deeper into one of those topics, you can just keep branching out. So like if that upper topic, if they keep exploring that, you can go deeper into that, and you can literally keep branching out as much as you need to. And what's nice about the mind map format, until you run out of space on the page, is that like you can continue hopping around from topic to topic. You can, in one part of the conversation, maybe they expand on like these two ideas, but then maybe they hop back to this one, so you can add to that. So that's why I like mind mapping as a tool, because it's flexible, and you can kind of like fill the page and connect these ideas as they come up. But then again, like the only challenge with mind maps is like, what do you do when you fill the page? That's where, for me at least, the appeal of something like a whiteboard app with an infinite canvas, that's a pretty cool application for that type of tool, because with some of those whiteboard apps, if there is an infinite canvas, you can just keep branching out as much as you need. So those are a couple of thoughts on kind of how to arrange your notes. There's another approach. This is a video you can search if you're interested, called the brick road approach to sketchnoting. That's one other approach that, if you'd like to, you can explore that. We've got hello from India. Shelley asked, I think signing up to digital sketchnoting, probably digital sketchnoting, maybe the community, you can still register for both. Yeah, so that's a good point about digital sketchnoting, because even though we had like the week 1 webinar, kind of no matter where we are in the process, you can sign up at any time. You'll be able to kind of watch all of the replays from the previous weeks. You could kind of try to catch up and then join us in real time, or just use those replays and then still use kind of the forums within the new learning environment to share your work along the way. So you can hop in at any time. And this is also just like kind of the middle phase of the development of digital sketchnoting, because after this live run through, that's where I'm gonna seek out feedback from folks participating live, look for ways to improve the lessons, and then I'll go record more polished video lessons, and those will kind of make the final version of the course. So that's coming in a couple of months. And what I think I'll do, once those polished video lessons are ready, I think we'll do kind of another live run through, which should be fun, where rather than like presenting the materials in live webinar workshops here, each week you'll get to watch those polished video lessons, but then we'll have like an office hours or a Q&A for follow-up and questions about those lessons. So I think that's how we might roll out kind of phase 3, the kind of final version of those course materials. Got a few more folks from India and Germany. Love the global crowd here. Shelley says, yes, you can sketchnote in math. I was a math teacher, and we have used it in our middle school. Love that, Shelley. Yeah, Shelley, if you feel like you might have already seen these, would love to hear your thoughts and suggestions about sketchnoting in a math classroom. Will you also integrate an Android app? Not sure exactly what that question pertains to. If it's referring to the new learning platform, one of the reasons that I'm excited about Mighty Networks is that there is an app associated with it that does exist both in iOS and on Android. And it has a good like web portal as well. So it's hitting all the marks on those. Barbara is asking about the mastermind session. So that mastermind session kicks off at noon today for anybody that's signed up for the Verbal to Visual community, which is a separate branch from the courses. So if you sign up for just a course, you won't have seen that mastermind yet. But if you are part of the Verbal to Visual community, it's a group within this kind of bigger online learning platform. Then from the events page, the event section within the community, that's where you'll see info about today's live mastermind. Again, that starts at noon Pacific time. It will be recorded, so the replay of that will be available. And it'd be fun to go back and watch last month's mastermind. It was fun to hear what some community members are up to and just like dig deeper into the projects that you are working on. That's a fun part of that. Hello from Germany and Romania and Peru, and Virginia. John mentions I use mind maps for educational purposes and to memorize. Katie is in Portland, Oregon. Hope you're doing well, enjoying the nice weather for a couple of days here. Ooh, Shelley has a nice suggestion related to math and science sketch notes. Checking out Valeria Sketches on Twitter. Thanks for that suggestion, Shelley. Supanchu says, your course helped me to teach cloud computing and grow my online business to 5x. How about that? There's a good testimonial. Thanks for everything you do, Doug. You are a wonderful teacher. I appreciate that. And congrats on that success. It's cool to see sketchnoting applied to complex topics. And both I'm seeing people use it as a teaching tool, both within like the education setting, folks that are actually, teaching a particular skill, but also a lot of like businesses, a lot of software involves customer education. You're like teaching your customers how to use this tool. And I'm seeing more and more folks use sketchnoting in that way. I'm actually right now in the process of editing the first batch of podcast episodes for a new podcast that I hope will launch 2 weeks from today. Those podcasts are coaching calls for anyone that has signed up for one of my courses or joined the Verbal to Visual community. Kind of once you're in the Mighty Network, once you're in Verbal to Visual's Mighty Network, there's a spot there where you can sign up for a 30-minute coaching call with me, which is just, again, a fun way to go deep with an individual person, talk about what they're working on. But the first coaching call that I just kind of went back and edited was specifically that application. A person working in like a tech software environment, and his job is to educate customers about how to use that project, how to use that product. And he's making kind of cool sketchnote videos for these kind of video tutorials. So that's kind of just a cool application that I felt like highlighting, and it sounds like you're up to as well. Maybe just talking about tech, maybe made me think of that. Sani or Sani, I apologize. I'm sure I'm botching pronunciation of names, so I apologize for that. Hello from France. For sketchnoting and modelization is the Apple Combo Kit, Procreate, etc., miles ahead versus Windows. This is something where I only have experience with the iPad. I don't have direct experience with the Windows products, but I doubt, maybe at the very beginning, I feel like the iPad probably had an edge over Windows tablets, but I would be surprised if they're not fairly comparable at this point. And I might even be wrong about like the iPad having an edge early on. I know just kind of anecdotally from the folks that are participating in digital sketchnoting, there are a lot of iPad users. That's probably more common than any other type of tablet, but there are plenty of other folks using like Samsung tablets and probably some like hybrid laptop tablet things going on there. So my sense is that there are great tools within both of those categories. And it might even be like maybe more so than looking at the hardware. Probably it might be more helpful to look at the software first, because that is kind of an unfortunate thing that some of the more popular sketchnoting apps might only be available on one platform or the other, and it seems that that tends to lean toward like being on iOS, being available on the iPad, but not on Android. So maybe that could be something to look at, kind of identify the app that you would like to use and see what devices that app is available on. I found visuals super useful in helping kids better understand math problems. It's good to hear. Javier says, best way to make clean sketches without a tablet. Digitize. I take a photo of the sketch, clean it up in Photoshop, vectorize it in Illustrator. Any better programs or process? Good question, Javier. And I like you bringing up the fact that, even like if you prefer pen and paper, there are still opportunities for you to digitize and clean up and get them in this form that might be more reusable or storable or shareable. Javier, that process that you just described is exactly what I went through when I'm doing that workflow. I think there's one thing you might look into. I think there's an Adobe app that tries to kind of do that process all at once. So I think it's an app that you can get on your phone where you can take a photo and it kind of like automatically vectorizes it, cleans it, and gets it kind of into a shareable format. If anyone knows the name of that app, I don't know it off the top of my head, but that might be one to check out because it might speed up the process a little bit. But the process you just described works well, and it is what I'm familiar with. John Clare, I use mind maps for educational purposes and to memorize. So to create a mind map, it has to be memorable for me. There you go. Mr. Wright, do you have any experience doing live sketchnoting during a webinar? Like this, perhaps. Tablet versus paper in front of camera. I haven't done much of that. Yeah, so I would like to get to the point where I'm doing more of that in these situations, which is why I felt, good about even just like sketching these things out earlier. But it's also, it can be a challenging thing if you're like hosting the webinar and also sketching it out. But both options that you described seem like good ones to me. There's even like document cameras you might look up if you're not familiar with those. They're essentially like little cameras that hook up to your computer that are on a little stand that point downward, that you can use exactly for this purpose. Or teachers use this in the classroom setting to be able to do their lesson on pen and paper, but from that document camera via a projector, share it on the screen for the entire class as well. So that's great because you could, be facing your students while sketchnoting or sharing your lesson that's showing up on the big screen. That can work for a webinar setting as well. So that when you're hopping on a webinar, rather than, using your webcam, you can share that screen. And then there also are a lot of promising things about using a tablet in that same way. So that, maybe by connecting it with USB to your laptop and pulling up a QuickTime window or just kind of screen mirroring, you can sketchnote the webinar and present that to other webinar participants. So those are those are two exciting applications to me, but ones that I don't have a whole lot of direct experience with yet. And I think that a potential future upgrade for this setup. Like right now, live streaming in this way, I'm just using the like stream from your webcam. So I don't even think right now, like I don't have the option to change my camera. But there are some pretty cool software out there to be able to live stream in this way and set up different cameras and do more interesting things. So maybe in the future, I might have more tips to share for that. Another question. Love all these questions. Sorry if it's taken me a while to kind of get through the text chat, but keep the questions coming. Another point, I don't always know how to organize it. Where should I put words and where the images? Also from the same person here, how do you know what to draw? Do you plan ahead how the note is going to be? Yeah, so we talked a little bit about this earlier, but I think the idea of doing some planning up front is helpful. I encourage folks to like identify your sketchnoting process before you like hop into a sketchnoting session. So when I say that, like identifying your process, just deciding like, okay, I'm going to use this pen and maybe only this pen, or maybe like two markers and give each marker a role. I'll use this black marker for drawing images, this red marker for text. Deciding some of those things up front, but then also deciding like how you're going to fill the page. And in terms of like when to write words versus when to draw something out, for me, it's kind of always a combination of the two of them. And for any any big idea, try to have both is I think my approach. Like what's a good visual to represent that idea, and then what's the least amount of text that gives enough context to that visual just to kind of trigger my brain for what I was going for there. So that's generally my approach. And then that's kind of how you get each individual idea down, but then looking for ways, like maybe with a mind map, to connect those ideas so that it's not just this idea, that idea, that idea, but there's some sort of a diagram to it or some way that you show how those ideas are connected to each other. Because that's where like a lot of the power for me in sketchnoting comes from is identifying those relationships between different ideas. And that's what makes the mind map structure a powerful one. Those are some thoughts there. Shelley says that it's not backwards. Okay, cool. Thank you, Shelley. That's helpful to hear. Here's a good application. If you have a test or anything you need to remember, do you hang the notes on the wall? Sometimes, yeah. So let's like think about that application of preparing for a test or just something you want to memorize and know. I tend to, when I'm like working on a wall, often it's in the like creation of the notes in the first place that I will go to the wall, get like individual ideas down, put it up on the wall, get the next one down, put it up on the wall. I like using blue tape for that because it makes it pretty easy to move those ideas around and like get to that really big picture of whatever it is I'm learning. And I remember doing this back in like grad school and like, going down into like some basement classroom over the weekend, like taking the entire unit that we're learning and trying to get all of the main ideas in one place. So I do like that as a way to get a big picture of any topic. One thing I'll point out, though, that I know just from kind of learning theory and research is that when you review information in a couple of different locations, that helps you to remember it better. So like it would be less effective for me to always study in this exact location with this exact same environment. It would be more helpful if maybe I had my mind maps in a folder or a bunch of ideas on index cards, and I do one study session here, then maybe like I go outside and sit on the front porch and like I study those ideas there as well, because that different background environment, the fact that that is novel, it almost creates like new connection points in your brain to that information. So that's just a general study technique to help you remember those ideas better. So that kind of points to the advantage of having some mobile form of your sketch notes and not just up on a wall, so that you can go to those different environments, study in those different environments, which will make it more likely when you're in the test environment to be able to bring those ideas to mind. Shelley says our students do draft sketch note and then go back to color them in, or revise them in any way to study. Nice. Yeah, I like that as like a second stage in the sketchnoting process, and also part of the study process, revisiting them in that way. Legia says, I often feel I've ruined my visuals by adding color or shading. How do you strike a balance between too simple and overworked visuals? Great question. I tend to lean, I have the same worries, I think, often, which so far at least has caused me to lean heavy just on the simple approach and not worrying about adding too much color or shading. Um, I do see that as like a category of growth for me personally, because I think that those touches of color and that bit of shading can make the notes more dynamic and make them pop. Um, so I think it's just experimentation. I wish maybe there were a better answer, and maybe folks that have more experience with that particular kind of sub skill set of sketchnoting might have better ideas. But I think experimentation until you find like, I think you have to cross that boundary enough times. Getting to those like overworked visuals to realize, no, okay, let's pull it back. I don't need to shade this much, only like this little much, to figure out what's the right amount for you. um, and maybe to get there, you could like move in small chunks in terms of how much color, how much shading you're adding, uh, just to figure out which works for you. Which app do you recommend for digital notes on Android? I wish I had more experience with Android. Um, Maybe Autodesk Sketchbook is a real great one for Android. If other folks have suggestions for Android, throw them in the chat. Perfect follow-up one to that. What's the best sketchnoting app for iPad? Oh, it depends like what category of app you want. This is kind of, I feel like, what I'm realizing with the experimentations that I've been doing with different apps for sketchnoting, chatting with others about what they're using and how they're using them. So the way I see it right now are the three categories of kind of sketchnoting apps, or apps that are appealing to sketchnoters. One is the drawing app. That's where Procreate lives. That's where Sketchbook lives. The other is a note-taking app. That's where GoodNotes and Notability come in. They're like built as note-taking tools. And then the third category is a whiteboard app. So kind of like, they tend to be infinite canvas whiteboards. A lot of them have collaborative features built in. So the first is kind of to decide which of those categories is most appealing and helpful for you. Roughly speaking, within that drawing category, I like Procreate. I like Sketchbook. Within I guess I kind of listed my top ones right now within each category. Within the note taking, I think I have a slight preference towards GoodNotes over Notability. Within the whiteboard app, Probably concepts. Two really good ones are concepts and explain everything. The app Explain Everything has a lot more features to it. It's has some collaborative tools built in. It's more complex. So concepts is a lot easier to use right out of the gate, which is why I think within the whiteboard category, concepts is kind of my favorite right now. I hope that helps. Here's a question. I feel I'm poor at drawing. How do I start? I have an iPad. Yeah, the drawing question comes up a lot. It's I think at one time or another, it's a challenge for all of us, at least those of us that didn't grow up doing a ton of doodling and didn't stick with their doodling that we all probably did in childhood. Two thoughts, particularly with an iPad. So my general idea or my approach to drawing is to the first step is just to get comfortable making marks that aren't letters. You're probably already comfortable with that if you've done enough handwriting. So to bridge the gap between handwriting and drawing, start by warming up with just a bunch of squiggles and shapes. Fill the page with lines and bubbles and big rectangles, different sizes, different orientations for drawing, all of those things, just to get used to making different types of marks. And as your hand gets better at that, then you can actually start to draw objects that represent something. And once you get there, I like to suggest that folks just pick kind of some simple objects and break those objects down into straight lines and curved lines. So what's the combination of straight lines and curved lines that will allow you to draw a mug, for example? And you can kind of work your way up to more complex objects. What is nice to do on an iPad, and you can do this on pen and paper as well, is tracing. I think tracing is a great way to build your drawing skills also. I actually recently picked up a cool digital download resource from Ava Lotta Lamb, a resource for drawing people. Yeah, I don't know if I can find a link for that, but I think it's called Little People something. I forget the rest of the download there, but it's a PDF resource that helps you draw simple characters, people in this cool style. I really like her style. So it's kind of these templates with these gray sketches of people in different poses, and that's perfect for throwing into one layer of your app, or just throwing that image onto your drawing app and then tracing over those just to get comfortable with making those types of marks. So that's my other suggestion for drawing, particularly on an iPad. Ari says, thank you for doing this. You are welcome. Question, how did you start with visual note taking? So for me, I think there's kind of layers to it. In graduate school, when I was kind of training to become a high school teacher, that's when I first kind of looked closely at mind maps, the idea of representing ideas in that visual way. So that was kind of my first exposure to doing things that doing anything other than outlines. So that was the first little spark. But then it was coming across Sunny Brown's TED Talk called Doodlers Unite that really got me started. So that TED Talk helped a lot at the time, and maybe this is still available within Sunny Brown's materials. She had an online course, which I took and enjoyed, got a lot out of. So that was a good starting point. And then Mike Rohde's book, The Sketchnote Handbook, was also a great starting point for building my skills. So finding those kind of learning materials to give me some ideas, and then just doing a lot of practicing, which I most often did with whatever podcasts I was listening to, finding interesting TED Talks, just getting those reps in, and kind of slowly starting to figure out what my approach to sketchnoting would be, my sketchnoting style. And I think that only comes with practice and repetition and trying out different ideas and approaches from different people as you figure out what is most comfortable for you, what you enjoy doing, and also what aligns well with your purpose for sketchnoting. I feel like we constantly need to remind ourselves, at least I do, that the process isn't about creating this pretty picture. It's about creating something that helps you remember the ideas that you're learning, take action on the ideas that you're learning, potentially share those ideas with others. That's where you do have to pay some attention to, how they look. But in all of those cases where they're just for you, it's not about the looks, it's about the impact. So that's a particularly important thing to keep in mind early on. Katie asks, how do you discern which content to share for free versus share at a price? It's a great question for anyone making things online and, sharing topics that they're interested in. And it's been fun. To be honest, I enjoy talking about those questions too, and those nuts and bolts, because I feel like the folks that get into sketchnoting, obviously it's folks that are into learning, and often it's folks that are into sharing their ideas. So it's not an uncommon leap for people to, be interested in sketchnoting because it helps them learn new things and do better work. But then you can also see, oh, this is a pretty cool teaching tool. And there are lots of opportunities to teach in person or online, no matter what subject you're interested in. So that's kind of why I enjoy talking about these topics. I created a resource called Build an Online Course with Sketchnotes for folks that want to go in that direction. And for this specific question, so for me, when I think about the things that I share on YouTube, it's kind of scattershot in terms of, it's often whatever I am most interested in that moment, or a question that has come in that I want to explore, a particular thing that I'm learning right now. So obviously there's this overarching theme of helping others develop their sketchnoting skills. So it has to be, my filter is it has to be useful for folks building their sketchnoting skills. But even just examples of sketchnotes can fit into that category. That's why from time to time, I'll share my sketchnotes from a book that I just read or a podcast that I just listened to. So it's a combination of those things, and sketchnoting lessons, a specific, here's how to get better at this specific thing. So that's kind of the scattershot nature of what I put out for free. The value that I see in creating something like an online course is that you're kind of simplifying the learning process. You're organizing it. I put quite a bit of time into the structure of that learning experience. So it's a much more complete process from start to finish. It has focus to it. Each course has a particular goal associated with it, like a transformation that I hopefully bring all folks that sign up for that course, bring them through that transformation, providing the right amount of instructional material and follow-up activities and kind of support, whether that's direct support one-on-one with me. Now within the new learning environment, there's a lot of kind of more group support in terms of you being able to share your progress as you work through a course. So there's accountability built into that. There's also opportunity for feedback built into that. That's to me what makes an online course, for example, valuable and worth paying for. Um, so I think that's how I think about what I charge for, and then what I put out for free. I hope that makes sense. And it's a question that I keep revisiting too. It's always like, do I feel like I'm doing this right? And um, but mostly I feel good about that approach. Shelley riffing on color. Folks have their own preferences. Doug usually keeps it limited. I like more color. That's a good point too. That like there's so much like personal choice involved in all of these components of sketchnoting, which is why it's so interesting and customizable. So ultimately, with any of the kind of individual aspects of sketchnoting, you get to decide what's most useful to you and what you like to do, including with color. Mari says, I use sketch notes all the time in high school ELA. Nice. Lazar says, hi, Doug. Greetings from Russia. Do you use interval repetition techniques in your training? Probably not. Interval repetition techniques. No, that could be something that I could do better. And I'm thinking of like, I think I know what that means when you say interval repetition techniques. I'm not familiar with Anki, Anki, but I imagine, practicing this skill, taking some sort of a break, like practicing that same skill again, taking some sort of a break. And, the break could be days or weeks but maybe like increasing the intensity or the nature of that practice each time. When I think of what interval repetition techniques might look like for sketchnoters, it's probably what comes to mind first, at least, is the idea of building your visual vocabulary and your comfort level with drawing. You could do this with like pick 20 icons, and I could see this kind of interval training as a helpful way to get to the point where those 20 icons are solidly within your muscle memory. So you don't have to think about drawing them anymore. They're there. You got it. That could be a place where interval repetition techniques could come in, if I'm even understanding that correctly. John says, how do you come up with an image to draw if it's an abstract word or image, like trust, feeling, purpose? Another good question that I feel like comes up fairly frequently. So I actually, to come up with a visual, I try to take it away from the abstract and think of a concrete situation that represents that word. And oftentimes, when you come across an abstract concept like trust or feeling or purpose, it doesn't come out of thin air. It comes from some particular subject that you're sketchnoting. Maybe there's like a conversation going on there. They're talking about something and this idea of trust comes up. Or maybe you're working on presenting some material around this topic and trust comes up. Like, what is that situation? Is it trust between parent and child? Is it trust between friends? Is it trust between countries? And use the specifics to come up with a visual. So with something like trust, there are inherently like at least two parties involved, the folks that are trusting each other. So I would probably do, like one party here, maybe like a heart in the middle connecting the two, just to show that they are linked. But for the specifics of like who those people are, that's where the context surrounding where trust comes up, that comes into play. So like try to get a specific picture in your mind and use that to help you come up with the visuals. Same with purpose. Like what's going on surrounding this word purpose. Is it purpose connected to going to college? Like, what's the purpose of going to college? Is the purpose connected to your work life? Is it purpose connected to your family life? Use the specifics to help you come up with visuals. Leisha asks, how do you deal with mistakes when you draw directly in marker? Yeah, that's never fun. One tip that I heard, I think this came from one of Mike Rohde's books, from one of the other sketchnoters that Mike profiled in one of his books. I think it was a she. I think she, anytime there was a mistake, she like turned that into a heart maybe, or a balloon or something like that. So you kind of like cover up your mistakes with, some sort of playful mark. You could even like customize that to the subject material that you're sketchnoting. And you could even like set this up beforehand. Like if I make a mistake, I'm just going to like shade that over with this icon or this type of mark. So that's one approach to kind of like cover up your mistakes. Another is to just leave it in and like even draw an arrow and point to it and be like, oops. I've done that like occasionally with a few of my videos here on YouTube. If I make a mistake and, I'm halfway through like a big poster paper and I don't want to start the recording process over again, I'll just point an arrow and be like, oops, clearly that's a mistake, but I'm going to keep going because that mistake doesn't impact the viewer's ability to get something out of the video that I'm making there. So like chances are a lot of mistakes don't actually matter. You don't even need to correct them. You can like address them in a playful way if you want. But yeah, in a lot of cases, just go with it. Lots of great questions coming in. Keep them coming. Cam Scanner is one app to check out for the digitizing process. Adobe Capture, I think that's the one I was thinking of. Thank you, Leisha. IPEVO, it's another one Shelley recommends, is an easy-to-use document camera and easily portable. Cool. So that sounds like a separate, not an app, but a document camera that is small enough to take around. Seconded by Rachel. Yeah, there's another, I imagine there's one question, how to set up overhead camera setup with mobile. So I'm guessing, like using a phone to do this overhead shot. Thankfully, with something like a phone, it's not too hard to, use some sort of a tripod or clamps, some way to like just get this above your screen because it's lightweight. That's not too hard to do. Yeah, I don't know if I have any specific advice for that though. Catching up here on the chat. Fabrice says, what are the differentiators of your online course about digital sketchnoting comparing to other online courses available on the market? To be honest, I am not familiar with the other digital sketchnoting courses, so can't particularly speak to that. What might make my course stand out is the the way in which we're building it in a very collaborative way, in terms of like we launched it even at the very end of 2019. It's been really fun to have folks participate early on in terms of asking their questions, sharing the apps that they're working with. Just because what I think potentially makes digital sketchnoting a challenging topic is the number of options out there. And I am not pretending to be an expert in all of those options. Like I mentioned, I don't have an Android device, so I can't speak directly to that. But because of the number of people that are going through this course creation process together, we get to hear a lot of different voices and see what different folks are doing in different settings too. This kind of came up at the end of yesterday's webinar, like a group of university teachers, university educators who kind of want to be able to connect with each other around this topic of digital sketchnoting. But there are all sorts of other different professions, and so you'll get to see folks using digital sketchnoting in all sorts of different subject areas and different professions. And I think there's enough diversity in the tools being used that, I see my role is kind of identifying these higher level principles in terms of how to use the common features that are available to you within these different apps, how to build a sketchnoting process from those features, and give examples from my own experience with the various apps that I'm using and trying to get good with. But then all of the course participants will be able to hop in and kind of share their experience with the apps that they're using, so that any individual person gets to see all that, and that will help them see what options are available and help them decide which ones they'd like to use. That might be a differentiator. Question here, kind of process oriented. Let's say you're sketchnoting, you have your bullet points, but you come to a point where the time where you need to use visuals, what time you need to use words. So I think this is a good example to think through, because I actually really like this process, particularly when listening to podcasts, like out on a walk. I love just using Evernote to keep like a bulleted list of kind of key ideas as I'm walking and listening. Anytime a idea comes up that I'm interested in, I'll stop and pull out Evernote, keep a bulleted list. What I tend to do when I'm creating that bulleted list is I'm also creating sections while I do that. So maybe like a first topic comes up and there's 3 or 4 bullet point ideas connected to that topic. Second comes up, 3 or 4 ideas connected to that. Third idea, same thing. So you end up with these, let's just say like 3 different sections, each of which have a handful of bullet points associated with them. What I enjoy about that as the first stage of the note-taking process is that kind of going from stage 2, you can look back and the kind of full set of ideas that you'd like to remember. And then you can decide, okay, what's the most helpful way for me to visualize and remember those ideas? Sometimes it might be just like give each of those chunks like a single page in a small notebook. If they're kind of like each separate or independent of each other. You might realize, though, that those 3 chunks are connected in a way that maybe there's like an overarching scene where, I don't know, maybe it's like a mountain in the distance and there's some challenge that folks are working toward, where each chunk fits within some portion of that sketched scene. So if there's some sort of overarching visual metaphor that you can apply, like look for that. So those are like a couple of the ideas that come to mind. There's a good, I don't think I know precisely where it is to show you some examples of this, but I made a video, I think I called it Two-Stage Podcast Sketchnoting, on the go podcast sketchnoting or something like that, where I shared some sketch notes from a Tim Ferriss podcast episode. And I used that process that I just described. So there's that like overarching piece of what's the kind of larger format for your sketch notes. But then as you dig into each of those bulleted lists, you kind of like do that again for this section. Do I want to just kind of recreate this as a bulleted list with like helpful icons, or does this bulleted list represent maybe like a Venn diagram or some other sort of scene? I feel like I'm not being particularly helpful with that, like when to use words, when to use visuals, but hopefully that's a starting point. Here's an interesting question about, so Jason says, you mentioned going from paper to computer via scanning. Do you have ideas for skipping the paper and doing everything on the computer without an iPad? So I feel like there are two situations. You mentioned without an iPad, so just using the computer. I'm curious, like one application is computer with, I'm guessing this is not the situation that you're thinking of, but there are like Wacom tablets that you can use in conjunction with a computer so that it's a tablet, but there's no screen on the tablet. So you're drawing on this thing here, but it's showing up on your screen. That is a process similar to just using an iPad. But if you're just using a computer and no like drawing tool, I would probably lean toward, there are some cool like mind mapping software that's out there. And like even something like a Video Scribe where you can like drop in clip art and visuals like that. If I were only using a computer, not any sort of tablet, I would probably use like a mind mapping tool. That's actually how I started. When I mentioned coming across mind maps in grad school, it was because of a software called Inspiration that allowed you to create mind maps and do color coding and do some interesting things. So that's what I would do if I was just using a computer. Oh, interesting. Shelley mentions Explain Everything, whiteboard app, is used by a lot of schools, especially with younger children. Good to know. Javier talks about improving drawing, the tip of breaking objects into shapes. Example, fish. What shapes would you make a simple shape of a fish? Definitely like triangle and teardrop. That's there we go. We got a fish. Very simple fish, but you know, from there you can add fins and other things to it. As a means to get better at drawing a complex object, can be broken into simple shapes, in which a turn can be seen as a combination of straight and curved lines. Yeah, that sounds along the lines of what I was representing there. Shelley asks, what are your top 3 podcasts to listen to? Great question, Shelley. Probably shifts over time, but some of the most consistent are The Accidental Creative with Todd Henry. I feel like his episodes sit like at this great intersection of business and creativity. So I like that. He talks a lot about you know, entrepreneurship and business building, but like creative skills and creative skill building is woven into that really, really well. So let's go with that one. Right now, I'm also really been enjoying What Works with Tara McMullen. Tara is the reason that I heard about Mighty Networks, the platform that I'm now using for my online courses and community. What Works is also about business building from a, you know, I think of it as like a small, relatively small scale, like individual creators or small groups of teams starting small businesses. And again, it's that combo of business building and creative skill building. And sustainability in terms of taking care of your own mental, physical, emotional health, all those sorts of things. Okay, that was two. What would be a third one? Uh, Maybe Design Matters with Debbie Millman. I haven't been digging into that one a ton lately. Maybe one that I've listened to more frequently within the past couple of years, The Knowledge Project with Shane Parrish. That's probably, I think I've listened to that one more. So let's go with those. The Accidental Creative, What Works, The Knowledge Project. Katie says, this has been super helpful. Thank you. You're a great teacher. Thank you, Katie. I appreciate that. Here's a suggestion from Maria, a white gel pen. Great fix for messed up lines. I like that idea. I also think it'd be fun to do like white gel pen on black paper. The idea of using like colored paper, not just white, I feel like that just provides some like fun opportunities and like freshens things up. John asks, what is the best approach for a template for presenting an educational or business speech? Mind map, brick type. Best approach for a template, educational or business speech. My first question is like, is there a single best template? There might not be. It might depend on the message that you're sharing. Yeah, that might be it. The two that come to mind, I think mind map is a great option. If you show how it grows, especially if you're able to like the challenge with when presenting ideas in that way is, not wanting to overwhelm people with the quantity of information. So like introducing one piece at a time. And what could be cool about using a mind map for that is, you introduce the central topic, you introduce kind of the main chunks, and then you dig deeper into those main chunks. So if you were to use a mind map, I would make sure to like use a presentation software that allows you to do some zooming in and zooming out so that you can like zoom in on each of the subsections as you're filling them out and kind of pan around in that way. So that folks like don't get overwhelmed with the amount of things on the screen. But then you also kind of zoom out so that in the end, they can see that full bigger picture. I think that could be a great way for a presentation. Yeah, I'm sure other diagram types would work as well. Even like a single scene per slide, I think would be a good way to go about it. Again, this is all depending on like what message you want to get across, what impact you want to have, but like a single idea per screen is not a bad way to go when it's anchored to a strong visual. Those are a couple of ideas. Shelley asks, did you do a video on your setup with using books for your phone? Yeah, it might be somewhere else I saw. Yeah, I think I did a series a while back. This might have even been before. I have a course called How to Make Sketchnote Videos, where I lay out a handful of options. I think before I made that course, I did a video series about creating a Sketchnote video on your iPhone. So if you search like Sketchnote video iPhone, you probably see it. And I use like some small tripod. So the first time I started making any videos like what I make on and share on this YouTube channel, now I've got like a pretty good setup with like cameras and lights and things like that. But in the very beginning, it was literally like wedging my phone in between like a stack of books just to be able to draw on an index card using like Instagram's time-lapse app, whatever that one was called. to like speed up the video. So yeah, that was the start of making videos like these. Shelley says, I've taken several courses from you and others. I like your collaborative process, and as an educator, your end product is very aligned to effective instruction. Thank you, Shelley. I appreciate that. Sebastian asks, are you thinking in some theoretical framework to make your sketches? A theoretical framework. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. I think the closest I can come to answering that is I do like I try to define my process and the overall approach before I start making sketches. Do you think sketchnoting is possible for engineering students dealing with lots of maths? I do, yeah. We talked a little bit about this early in the live stream, but what you might turn to for engineering, for math, I feel like process diagrams are a great way to go. Like flow charts, like this idea, and then like depending on what happens, it could go this way or this way, and this is the next idea, and like flow chart out the ideas that you're working with, and whenever appropriate, like create a sketch of the situation, of the thing that you're building, the system you're creating. If there's actual like physical objects and things that you're working with, like those are the sketches that you can include, but then leave it, maybe lean into the flowchart process diagram uh, as a way to visualize. Google Keep. I'm guessing that might be another app to check out. Shelley mentions there's a German sketchnoter who does high-level science and math using sketchnotes. Thanks for finding that. That's at the ISBT. Also, Rob Dimeo does a lot of science-based sketch notes, so he'd be another good guy to check out. ROBDIMEO, I think. Yeah, I got a couple questions around like the best way to get started. It's taking lots of time to start sketchnoting for the first time. How is it the best way to get started? The best way to get started. Good question. I feel like I haven't thought about that one recently. I think it depends a little bit on like your current comfort level with drawing. Like if you considered yourself to be a doodler growing up, then I think that's one situation where it probably is a natural transition to just, well, start doodling the things that you're listening to. But I think it's more challenging for folks like me. I was in this category that like I didn't consider myself a doodler. I stopped drawing after like second grade. And for me, what I found to be helpful was leaning into kind of like the more diagram style, like the mind map pieces. So leaning into the spatial reasoning power of sketchnoting, and from time to time, like trying to add an icon or a real simple drawing to like some of those nodes, but not putting too much emphasis on the drawing component of sketch notes early on. Weave them in when you can, but start out by just kind of doing some diagramming. I think that's a good entry point. Nice, getting some cool applications of sketchnoting. Shelley mentioning using them for slides all the time. I like that they are original and people pay more attention. Yeah, if your entire presentation is just like things you sketched out on a piece of paper, on an index card, that's a great way to like draw people in. Um, Simone, hello, Simone says, I use sketch notes to explain the contents of my classes about management, productivity, organizing. Key point: use of lesser words. Yeah, is important. That's a good kind of sub skill of sketchnoting. You know, taking a paragraph or 2 minutes of conversation, or developing that skill of paraphrasing down a bunch of words into like the smallest phrase possible that triggers those ideas and represents the crux of whatever's being explored. Look at us going for an hour and 15 minutes. Probably start to wrap up pretty soon here. Beast Builder asks, do you think about a mind map course with sketch notes for students, or any specific course for students? Oh man, that would be kind of fun just to do like a mind mapping course. Uh, um, that currently does not exist, but generally a course for students. Two come to mind. So I think the first course that I made, an introduction to visual note taking, is a great way to like lay your foundation of sketchnoting skills, no matter what application. Um, Within that course, I address three primary applications of sketchnoting: learning, problem solving, and idea sharing. Um, so I think there'll be a lot of good ways to kind of like uh, create a sketchnoting process that's helpful for you as a student while you work through that course. I also created a resource called Sketchnoting in the Classroom, which could be of interest to you depending on the level of student that you are. I built that course with middle school and high school teachers in mind. So that's a resource kit that has a bunch of videos and activities that are designed for middle school and high school teachers to play those little like sketchnoting instructional videos in their classroom to help their students learn sketchnoting. So the idea is that they like on a given day, maybe there's this, students learn about handwritten fonts. They practice that a little bit, and then they apply that specific sketchnoting skill to the other content that that teacher is bringing into their classroom that day. Um, so that would be helpful, through high school. But if you're in college or later, I would say the intro course is your best bet. One comment about mind maps using lots of words. They don't have to. You get to choose how much words you put in. Plus, with any given node, you can like add visuals to it. That's why I like mind maps, because of the flexibility there. Martin asks, any idea how to organize information on an infinite whiteboard, like MS Whiteboard or Explain Everything? Yeah, I think I'm in the process of developing an approach for using an infinite whiteboard. So far, my general approach is to go with a mind map where there's a central question or topic in the middle. That's where I start, and then I branch out from there. And that's where the infinite canvas comes in real handy, because I know I'm never gonna run out of room. Um, I think a question that will come up is, when will it be helpful to, maybe within the same canvas, start another central node of the mind map, right? So when to stop branching out from one mind map and start another, maybe on the same canvas. Um, I haven't yet, gotten that far into any individual uh, mind map to know how that works. But that's my current approach for whiteboards. Mari says, thanks. We'll return to the recording. Thank you, Mari. Folks saying, did the diagramming and mind mapping, but didn't move any further. Even doing that, honestly, is a powerful piece. What's the ideal sketchnoting approach if I love to draw, especially while real-time sketchnoting? That represents like a real interesting challenge. If you do love to draw and like maybe want to spend lots of time on your drawing, how do you kind of like balance that out with lots of information coming in when you're real-time sketchnoting and you maybe don't have time to do as much drawing as you like? For you, I would say, like in that situation, as you're doing this real-time sketchnoting, get enough of the drawing down for an idea that comes in. Like start it, but don't finish it. Start it enough to remind yourself of like what you picture as the final version of the drawing, but just get enough so that that picture stays in your head, or you will be reminded of it. And, you know, maybe enough words next to it to also remind you of that idea. Get the start of that drawing down, a helpful phrase or two to remind you, but then move on to the next drawing connected with the next ideas that come up. And then once you're done listening to the podcast or whatever it is that you're taking in real time, then go back to the drawings and spend that extra time finishing those drawings. What I like about that is that you're kind of immediately reinforcing those ideas right after you stop listening to the thing. As you go back and finish those drawings, you're like reminding yourself of this idea as you do the detailed drawing and maybe add a word or phrase or two, and then you move through each drawing, adding the amount of detail that you want. That's my suggestion there. All right, I think that might be a good place to wrap up. Sorry if there were a few questions I wasn't able to get to. Thank you so much for participating live here. I hope it was useful. The ideas that came up gave you some small steps or some big steps to move forward. And that might be kind of the general piece of encouragement that I'll leave you with here today, is that even if you're not like totally comfortable with sketchnoting yet, finding small steps, small little experiments to take the next time you hop into a sketchnoting session. I like taking that experimental approach to developing your process and building your skills over time, because it just takes some of the pressure off. It's not about like creating a polished result. It's about learning from that experiment. So decide what little experiment you'd like to do next, and then just see how it goes, and see what next experiment comes after that. And remember that it's not about what the visuals look like, it's about the impact that they have on your life. So those are some final thoughts. Thank you for all of the kind comments here. David and Shelley and Night Cobra and Dottie and John and Beast Builder. Hope everyone's doing well, staying safe, challenging times. I appreciate you hanging out with me here, and look forward to connecting in whatever format comes next, be it here or within our online classroom. All the best. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.